I work at a small roadside motel and often take the night shifts. Most nights are quiet, just a few travelers looking for a place to crash before getting back on the road. But one night was different. It was around 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I was sitting behind the front desk, half watching an old black and white movie on the tiny TV we kept there. The parking lot was empty except for a couple of cars, and I was starting to feel the weight of the late hour when the front door opened and a girl walked in. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s, and seemed lost. Her hair was a bit messy, and her clothes looked like she'd been on the road for a while. She walked up to the counter, her eyes darting around like she wasn't sure if she should be there, and asked me for directions, explaining that she was lost and her phone had died. She told me she was trying to find a friend's house a few towns over, but had ended up here instead. As I pulled out a local map to help her, the front door swung open again, and a man walked in. He was in his 40s, wearing a leather jacket, and there was something about him that instantly made me uneasy. He walked right up next to the girl, way too close for comfort. With a strange smile, he said he noticed she looked lost and offered to give her a ride. The girl took a step back, clearly uncomfortable, and said, "No, thank you," her voice steady but nervous. But the man didn't back off. He insisted it wasn't safe to be out here alone at this hour, and that he'd take her wherever she needed to go. His tone shifted, more forceful now. I could see the fear growing in her eyes. She said, "No, really, I'm okay," trying to sound firm. But the man's expression darkened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low growl, and said, "I'm not asking. You're coming with me." That was enough for me. I stepped in and told him to leave her alone, threatening to call the police. He turned with his face twisted in anger and told me to mind my own business. I picked up the phone and repeated to leave her alone. The girl moved closer to me, looking terrified. The man suddenly reached for her arm, but she managed to pull away and run behind the counter with me. I dialed 911, and just as the call connected, the man lunged over the counter, trying to grab the phone from my hand. I managed to shout our address into the phone, telling them to hurry, as the man wrestled the phone from me. He seemed to realize the police could arrive at any moment, and with a final glare, he turned and bolted out the door. A few moments later, 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot. The officers got out and spoke with both of us. The girl was still shaken, but relieved. She thanked me repeatedly as the police took her statement. They offered her a ride to a safe place, and she gladly accepted. After they left, I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Now, I don't complain about the lonely nights behind the counter anymore. Even when it gets boring, I appreciate the quiet, because I know things could be much worse. It all started on a typical night shift. My job was to patrol the neighborhood, hired by shop owners to keep a vigilant eye out and protect their businesses from potential threats during the dark hours. That night seemed no different at first. Quiet streets, a cool breeze, and the hum of my bike beneath me as I made my rounds. But around 2 a.m., I noticed something unusual. One of the shops had its light on. This was strange, since I knew for a fact that it closed by 7 p.m. at the latest. Curiosity piqued. I rode closer and called out the owner's name. I knew him well, so it didn't feel odd to knock and call out. But there was no answer. Not a single sound came from inside. I tried the front door, and to my surprise, it opened. The lock wasn't broken. It was simply unlocked. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out again, but the shop remained silent. Only the light at the front was on. Everything else was cloaked in darkness. An unsettling chill crawled up my spine, and something urged me to check the back. Moving deeper into the shop, I turned on the lights as I went. When I reached the back, I heard a noise from the basement, a faint, distant conversation. I hesitated for a moment, but then decided to investigate. I went downstairs, and the closer I got, the clearer the sound became, like someone talking in a muffled, almost distorted voice. There was a door at the bottom of the stairs, one I assumed led to a storage room. The voice was coming from behind it. I knocked, calling for the owner, but the moment I did, the voices stopped. I tried the door, but it was locked. I knocked again, and this time, I heard something I'll never forget. A woman's voice, faint, distorted, like it was coming from the other side of a deep, dark tunnel.
"Open the door,"
she pleaded.
"Help me, open the door."
At first, I thought maybe it was a phone. Perhaps the owner was inside unconscious, and someone on the line was trying to get help. I frantically looked around for a key, but found nothing. The voice continued, a haunting echo that grew more desperate with each passing second. I knew I had to act. I began throwing my shoulder against the door, ramming it with everything I had. The voice grew louder, more urgent, urging me on. Finally, with a mighty kick, the door splintered and gave way. The room beyond was dark. I flicked on the light switch, and what I saw was nothing. No one was there. The room was empty, but it looked like a tornado had torn through it. Boxes scattered everywhere, shelves knocked over, the air thick with dust, and the voice was gone. I stood there, heart racing, scanning the room for any signs of a speaker or anything that could have played a trick on me, but there was nothing, just silence and the remnants of chaos. I rushed back upstairs, out of the shop, and onto the street, half expecting to see someone watching me, but it was empty, completely deserted. I called the owner, with my hands shaking as I dialed. It took a few attempts, but he finally answered, his voice groggy from sleep. I told him everything, and he insisted he hadn't been at the shop, that he'd locked up hours ago, and no one had keys to that basement door except him. He came down to the shop, and together we went through everything again, but we found no answers, only more questions. The police arrived and searched the place, but they didn't believe my story about the voices. Who would? There were no cameras, no signs of forced entry, nothing to explain what had happened. But the owner believed me. He decided to repair the damage the next day, but that night, as we locked up the shop, neither of us could shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that storage room, and those voices I heard still haunt me. I've always worked the night shift as a security guard. I was used to the quiet hours and the calm of the city at rest. Most of my shifts were routine, but there was one night I can't forget. I was assigned to an old office building downtown. Most of the businesses had moved out, leaving only a few tenants on the upper floors. My job was to make rounds every hour, check the cameras, and make sure no one was sneaking in. Around 3 a.m., I noticed something strange on the security feed, a light on the 7th floor. That floor was supposed to be empty. All the offices there had been closed for months. I leaned in and saw a dim glow coming from one of the rooms. I switched to a different camera angle and saw the light flickering, like a candle or a small flashlight. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the stairs. When I reached the 7th floor, the silence was overwhelming. I walked down the hallway, flashlight in hand. The door to the office with the light was slightly open, and I could see the flickering glow inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The room was empty, with rows of old desks and chairs, but there was a candle burning on a desk in the corner. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not just from the candle, but like something else, something stronger. I looked around the room, searching for anything unusual, but there was nothing. I reached for the candle to put it out, and then I saw it, a reflection in the window across from me. A figure stood in the doorway behind me. I turned around quickly, but the doorway was empty. I called out, but there was no answer. The smell of smoke grew stronger. I turned back to the window, and the figure was closer in the reflection, right behind me. I turned around again, but still, no one was there. Feeling uneasy, I backed out of the room and headed down the hallway. I made my way back to the control room and checked the camera feed. The light on the 7th floor was gone. I rewound the footage and watched carefully. The light appeared, flickered, and then disappeared. But then I saw something else. A shadow moved across the camera, a figure standing in the window. It looked like it was staring at the camera. It wasn't clear, just a shape, but enough to give me a bad feeling. I checked the other cameras, but everything else was normal. Just that one moment, that one figure in the window. The next day I reported it to my supervisor, but he brushed it off as a trick of the light. But I knew what I saw. I've been working as a food delivery driver for a while now. You get used to the late nights, weird addresses, and all sorts of strange encounters. But there was one night that still sends a shiver down my spine whenever I think about it. It was almost midnight, and I had just received another order. The address was in a quiet neighborhood, a bit out of the way from my usual route. The place was dead quiet, not a single light on in any of the nearby homes. I thought it was odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe everyone was just asleep. I pulled up to the house. It looked like any other, dark, with the curtains drawn and not a light on inside. I parked, grabbed the food, and headed toward the front door. That's when I noticed a note taped to the door. It was hastily scribbled, almost as if someone had written it in a hurry. It read, "Doorbell broken. Door is unlocked. Leave the food on the kitchen table. Money is there." Immediately, a sense of unease crept over me. Something about the whole situation felt off. I've seen all kinds of notes from customers over the years, but this one gave me pause. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone peering out at me from a window or a shadow moving behind the curtains. But there was nothing. Just the empty street and the stillness of the night. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. Sure enough, it was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, the door creaking as it swung inward. The house was pitch black, darker than the night outside. I called out for someone. My voice echoed back at me, bouncing off the walls of the empty, dark space. I was about to step inside when I saw a silhouette, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the doorway, still and silent. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a person standing in the dark. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to do. Something wasn't right. I felt it deep in my gut. Why would someone just be standing there, not moving, not responding? I called out again, louder this time, but still no answer. The figure remained still, just a shadow among shadows. That's when my instincts kicked in. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave, so I slowly backed away. As I stepped back outside, I noticed something else. There were no cars in the driveway, no signs of anyone living there. The whole place seemed abandoned, almost like it hadn't been touched in years. I turned and hurried back to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the door. I threw the food on the passenger seat and sped off, glancing back at the house through my rearview mirror. It looked just as dark and empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got back to the restaurant, I told my manager about the strange delivery. He looked at me puzzled and told me that address is supposed to be vacant. No one's lived there for months. The reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. If the house was vacant, then who had placed the order? And who, or what, was that silhouette standing in the doorway? To this day, I'm haunted by that night.